Where do you put? I feel like we'd all put music probably at A tier. I think we all are pretty
I
into
would put music as S tier.
S tier. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's top
music's
tier.
like my favorite thing,
Yeah,
or one of them
Yes,
at
I'd put
least.
it at the top. For me, I think
yeah.
it's predictable and like it's predictable that I would put most of the visual mediums at the bottom because
Yeah.
that's just I mean it sounds like a cop out, but that's just not how I'm wired. Like I'm very
No, I
much a
feel that.
person of the written word, and I knew that when I was like 5.
Yeah.
And I think that with just gaining more knowledge about different art forms, I appreciate painting more and like it more a lot than other visual mediums. But
Uh-huh.
in practicing it, like I could never, like I just have no innate ability. And for something that I'm just like not that into, if we're gonna consider arts writ large, like architecture, I guess, and photography would be towards like the bottom, I guess, for me.
Ooh, architecture. I didn't think of that one. I might slot that in at C tier, but I don't know enough
Is
about it.
I appreciate architecture, but I'm not necessarily as art, I guess.
It's hard to. We can't participate in it. Like I
Yeah.
can't. Like it'd be cool if I could. If I could. I'd be more into it if I could build a building. But I just.
Yeah, I mean,
how many
it'd be
people get to
cool,
practice
but
architecture?
Also, I feel like I engage with architecture or like appreciate it more like on a functional level than an artistic level.
Sure. Totally. I agree with that. Okay. I guess this might be difficult though. But where do we put poetry versus fiction?
Interesting.
I'm putting poetry S tier because this is a poetry podcast. It is the love of my life, and
Nah,
it's
F.
it's. I like that, and I feel like it's just infinitely interesting to me. Fiction, you know what? I'll say it. It's too long. It's too fucking long. Short fiction, even. It's so long. Novels are so long.
Bruh.
Poetry.
Well, welcome to Not Fit for Composition. This is the fourth episode. I'm here. I'm August Smith, and I'm here. And that's Eleanor Eli Moss, and they're here. And that's Marcus Corey, and he's in Brooklyn. How are we doing today? I feel like we're struggling today.
Better after talking to you two.
I'm glad.
Yeah, I feel
That's
better
so
now.
nice.
Today's been kind
Yeah,
of stupid.
My mood has brightened a little for sure. I was looking forward to this today, even though it took us like an hour to set up.
Yes, but everything's great and nothing's gonna go wrong.
That's so true. We've got a few things to talk about today. I kind of wanted to start the conversation. We're gonna kind of go back to music here for a second. But did you guys see that thread? And it's deleted now. I just tried to pull it up. But that someone was describing Coworker music.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Marcus, maybe you can describe what it was.
Yes, I don't know who initially or at what stage I initially saw it, but people were discussing the concept of coworker music, with some of it being music that might be considered like of a certain scene, maybe at least more than 5 years ago. Like the one that struck me was like, oh, Joyce Manor is totally coworker music. And then the follow-up that I agreed with much more was like, who the hell are you people working with? Like I'm sorry, like the co-worker music is like I don't like Nicki Minaj and the Eagles, and that has been my experience. My experience has been people being like in whatever this like low hanging fruit, this like easy joke of like people that say concerts rather than shows, and I'm like, I'm going to a show, and people are like, what kind of show, like Broadway? And I'm like, no. And then it goes into like a long digression of me trying to condense like, oh, so there's this record label, da da da. That's the type of people that listen to Coworker music. So Coworker music is like the Red Hot Chili Peppers or I don't like. I'm really reaching my limit. Like, I don't know what else is played on the radio. The guy who's saying "You're beautiful," like that's Coworker music.
James Blunt.
Yeah, him. That's Coworker music to me. Like, I wish I was hanging out with like some like 24-year-old who really liked Joyce Manor. That'd be way sicker.
Yeah, the initial tweet, yeah, like you said, include like Joyce Manor or like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Yes.
And, like, yeah, that is Coworker music. Like when I was working at that like boutique donut shop with other people in their like early 20s, but then the response of the person who's like, no, real Coworker music is like Lynyrd Skynyrd and like the worst hip hop you've ever heard, but you don't know what it is, but it has like 8 million listeners. Like, yeah, I don't know. Eleanor, what are your thoughts on Coworker music as a concept?
I mean, it sounds reasonable to me. I could relate, but I also have a lot of weird coworkers. So
Yeah.
It varies in my personal experience.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wanted to start the discussion there because I wanted to sketch out maybe what could be a coworker poetry.
Before we like delve into that, I actually thought of a great segue that's more so halfway point of coworker literature, coworker belle lettre.
Perfect. Yes.
I have a very vivid memory of a mutual friend of ours, friend of the pod, Ostro, telling me that his instance of like coworker literature was him mentioning that he liked reading fiction or something, or maybe he said he liked reading like history or like reading in general, and a middle-aged woman gave him a book that was just about like people recounting their like near-death experience or what they like experienced when they died, like with a heavy afterlife, I think probably evangelical Christian tales to it. So that I think is a prime, that's like the platonic ideal of like coworker literature.
God, I'm trying to think of good examples of coworker literature. That's an amazing segue. I kind of think of something in reverse, and this is again at the donut shop that I worked at, but I gave a Terrence McKenna book. We did a Secret Santa, and I gave a Terrence McKenna book to one of my managers because he was my Secret Santa, and I knew he was like kind of into psychedelics and was kind of a weird guy. And I just, I'm not like a Terrence McKenna head or anything, but I was just like aware of it. So I was like, he might like this. And he like restructured his entire belief system around this book after I gave it to him. Like there was no question that this book, which is a book about mushrooms and it's a book about psychedelic mushrooms. And the part of the idea is like, early humans took mushrooms and that's where language comes from. And he was like, this is true. This is exactly how everything started. And
I love that.
Yeah. That's what I think when I think of coworker literature. Yeah. You work at a bookstore, Eleanor, so it's probably different for you.
Oh, it's way different. Again, it varies wildly.
But I think this first poem that I wanted to talk about is kind of relevant to that. This might fall under the category of coworker poetry. And this is a poem that went viral last month, I think, early March last month. And it kind of was it's one of those rare instances where a poem goes super viral. I mean, it really Like a poem can go viral, especially if you're in poetry circles and whatever. It gets a few thousand reads, but this has like 20 million views on Twitter. This poem, and it's called "There's Laundry to Do and a Genocide to Stop," and it's by some individual named Vinay Krishnan. I kind of looked at his stuff. He seems like one of these multi-hyphenate sort of individuals who's like, I'm a writer, I'm a screenwriter, I'm an organizer, I do podcasts, I do interviews, bit of everything. Don't know much about him, but this tweet went crazy viral. I would love for one of you guys to read it if you have it in front of you.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I have so
I know.
say, so little time. Okay. This is this individual's new poem. There's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. There's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. I have to eat better and also avoid a plague. My rent went up $150. I'll need to pick up more shifts. 20 people died in Rafah this morning, and every major news outlet is stretching the limits of passive voice to suggest whole families may have leaped up through the air at missiles that otherwise had the right of way. I just got a notification that my student loan payments are starting up again and my phone isn't charged. My cousin got COVID for a fourth time and can no longer work or walk or even feed himself. The person across from me on the L train seems to fashion themselves a punk rock revolutionary, but they're not wearing a face mask, and that's the kind of cognitive dissonance that makes me want to steal batteries. Fascists keep winning primaries for both parties, and I think I gained a few pounds. The CDC just announced there are no more speed limits on highways, and I think this Ativan is finally hitting. The NYPD farmers market only sells bad apples. Have you heard that one? Listen, it's warm today, too warm for March. But I don't have time to think through the implications because there's laundry to do and a genocide to stop.
Thank you for reading that. So like I said, this went crazy viral, and I saw a very perceptive tweet that said, I'm seeing this go viral on both Instagram and Twitter, but the difference is everyone on Twitter is making fun of this poem or calling it terrible, and everyone on Instagram is sharing it and saying it's relatable and deeply affecting, which is maybe a very interesting schism of the reaction to this poem. But this poem
That
reached,
makes sense.
yeah, this poem reached like visibility heights that rarely happens for poems. What's wrong with it?
Everything.
Whatever, it's fine. I don't care.
You love saying that. I always have to like prod you to say more things. But like, here's the thing. A lot of people were really, really vicious about this poem. I was kind of amazed at the level of like ire that this poem conjured in a lot of people. A lot of people who never had. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it comes out in people when they see something extremely political like this.
Yes, but it was even people who politically would understand that there's a genocide happening. Politically would understand that what's happening in Palestine. So I was just kind of amazed at the reaction to this poem got. I personally, it's not a good poem, but it's not like horrible. It definitely is lacking on like there's like a lot of clunky language. It's lacking on a formal level. The line breaks aren't really line breaks. I mean, I think the reason, honestly, cards on the table, I think the reason why people reacted to this so strongly were the lines about masking. I think
Yeah, probably. People don't like that.
Yeah, people really, I don't know. I'm so ambivalent about this subject, and I don't really want to get into it, but people there's like a growing, strong negative reaction to anybody who asks for masking. And this poem is pretty clearly sort of trying to like thread together all of these different like, things that are happening in the moment, and the stress of living under all of these like mounting atrocities and such. And there's a lot of poems that do that much better. But I gotta say, I think people reacted so strongly negatively, because of that, even if they didn't know that themselves.
Yeah, and the line that says, this person seems to fashion themselves a punk rock revolutionary probably kicked a lot of people in the the stomach because they kind of felt attacked, which I think maybe is telling.
Yes, exactly. I completely agree that it's telling that if the people's like strong negative reaction to this, like, was very telling of maybe the guilt they feel about this, even if they're not cognizant of it themselves. And I'm not saying that I'm someone who's masking all the time, but I do feel a weird level of ambivalence towards the subject. And I think that's got to be like the hidden reason as to why people freaked out about this poem. I don't think it has actually anything to do with the genocide lines, but maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah, you might be right. Honestly, I hope it doesn't have anything to do with the genocide lines, because that's really annoying if it does.
Yeah.
And I mean, I already have very little faith in humanity, but like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine. It's not horrible. It's just some person like talking about things that are happening.
Yeah. Like, it's not like a sublime poem that, but we've read much worse on this podcast already,
Oh yeah.
Marcus, what did you think?
I only remember really seeing it probably right when this screenshot or when it first went viral, and I just looked through a few of the responses, and I'm paraphrasing, but there's one that encapsulated why I dislike it and why maybe some people dislike it, though I did not really think of the punk lines or the masking, but that totally, like, that I totally see that now. Whereas I probably, if people mentioned that in their responses, I just like ignored it or didn't pay attention. It's more so that like, oh, like, congrats, you just made yourself like the main character, and that was my, like, why it left a bad taste in my mouth. And I went on. I wasn't like gonna become enraged by this guy. It's more so maybe it's just the title, and then the ending kind of like, I don't know, that kind of like does mention events that are happening, but then this like great focus on like his or their private life. And I don't know if that was intended. Actually, I imagine not, because it's not like a super well thought out poem. But I think that that's some of the responses I saw, like, oh, like, good job, like, you're for making yourself the center of attention, like, about this. And so that was my knee jerk, like, the reason for my knee jerk distaste.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really smart observation too, because there's no sense of like self-indictment in this poem, right? Like, maybe a similar poem that I can kind of think of would be, have you guys ever seen that poem? And it's gone sort of viral a few times, called "We Lived Happily During the War." I think it's by Ilya Kaminsky.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen that poem? And whatever, people argue about that poem, but I think it's a strong poem. And what that poem does is, and you can look it up if you want, but what that poem does is that self-indicts, right? It says, we lived happily during the war. It puts you in the position of the speaker, and it makes you feel the feelings of guilt for being within the imperial core and feeling any sense of happiness while bombs are dropping. This poem doesn't self-indict at all. This poem, like you said, it puts the speaker and, theoretically the writer, though I don't want to fall into that trap, but it loses a level of complexity by kind of being like a sort of level of sanctimoniousness is just kind of threaded throughout it.
Yeah, I could see that.
I kind of wanted to contrast this poem with another poem that went less viral. I've said viral 1,000 times so far. Less viral, but had equally strong reactions in the poetry world, and that is this poem called "The Jesus Fridge" by Jeffrey McDaniel. Did you guys see this? I kind of put it in the document a bit late.
No, I didn't.
No.
I'll read it. But this was a poem that was on poets.org Poem a Day, which is, the service that puts a poem into your mailbox every day. Great, fine. And I'll just read this poem. The Jesus Fridge. Your fridge died last week. The light still came on when you opened the door, like a doll sticking out her yellow tongue, but the jar of pickle spears, the oat milk, and in its blue cardboard house, the yogurt were as warm as an average day in Santa Monica. A couple $100 of provisions down the figurative drain. A new fridge, a vertical morgue with shelves, was ordered and set to be delivered from the truck's womb when, wait, the dead fridge came back to life. The Jesus Fridge. The dead food healthy again. This phrase was funny to you last week. The collision of the mundane and mechanical with the long-haired and sanctimonious. But it's not funny today. The world has changed. This is a George Floyd moment for both Israelis and Palestinians. Actually, scratch that. It's a George Floyd moment for both Americans who sympathize with Israel and Americans who sympathize with Palestinians. It's a holy fuck moment for anyone who cares about human life. Upstairs, the bathtub is filling with blood. How big would the swimming pool have to be to hold all the red salty stuff spilled in the last week? Who will recline in the fresh blood bath? What swimmers will adjust their goggles and freestyle the miles of blood? I think that's a terrible poem.
I think most poems are terrible poems.
Probably true. But this was in a bunch of people's mailboxes like the day before Easter or something. And this is by a pretty accomplished poet, Jeffrey McDaniel. And I don't want to say I'm like somehow prescient or something, but when I first read this poem, I was like, this is a first draft. And then I read the about the poem, and he was like, yeah, this is an unedited first draft. And the reason why I could tell is because the poem starts in one place and ends in a completely different place. And when I write a first draft, that's what the poem does. And later drafts, I find a way to make the sum come together. I find a way to thread whatever comes out at the beginning and the end into a sort of whole, and that's what makes the poem sort of live. And this poem doesn't do that. And
this
I don't
feels
really
like
get what the fuck this poem is going for.
This feels like two halves of two different poems.
Yes, this is a George Floyd moment for both Israelis and Palestinians. That is a Windsor of a line.
It's like it's an all-timer in the most negative of senses.
Yeah, like what is that going for? I don't get what that is even supposed to mean. Like, it doesn't feel like, okay, a metaphor like that is supposed to like open up and deepen your understanding of both things on either end of the metaphor. And this just makes me go, what is that? A George Floyd moment for both Israelis and you're just putting two atrocities next to each other. Like,
I think what he's trying to say is like a tragedy that like spurs people to action or something.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's a terrible way to say it.
It's so strange. I can see on the most base level that would be the read of it. But like, what is the point of making that comparison except to, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words.
Set off your
when I get to
nervous
that
system.
line.
Well, I mean,
It's working.
It's meant to be a buzzword. That's what people do a lot of the time. That's what gets you the views.
Yeah, I guess it's supposed to be pushing certain buttons in an American's head, maybe, but then the fridge just disappears halfway through the poem. You read through the poem, and then it becomes about a bathtub at the end. And
it's very strange. It's like he flips a switch, and it's like, oh, this is a different poem now.
What is up with these poems trying to write about Gaza and completely fucking fumbling? Like, is that like, are Americans just incapable of writing about this? Like,
I don't even think it's just Gaza. I mean, it's hard to write about a lot of shit like that with any kind of, tact.
Yeah. I guess
because people want you to know that they're writing about it, so they try to make it obvious, and then it just loses all fucking nuance, I guess. I don't know. There's just a lot of people fumble it. They can be done well, but
yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting to put this poem in conversation with the other poem because they both had their little moments online. This poem is formally very competent. It's clearly written by someone who is a practiced poet. There's these nice images. The line breaks are falling at these really satisfying moments. We've got longer sentences contrasted with shorter sentences. I mean, it kind of flows very nicely. The other poem formally is a mess. But the message of the other poem is very clear, even if it has a lot of issues. And the message of this more formally competent poem is so muddied and so both sidesy, and it feels like can we find some way to meet in the middle of between these two poems? We have a good poem that also has a good message. Like I don't know.
I mean, I feel like they're trying to do the exact same thing, but just with different approaches. They both start off with like, you know, kind of mundane things that are happening in the world and slowly, or that are happening like in the, you know, the speaker's life.
Yes.
And then slowly open up to, you know, like broader bullshit happening in the world.
Wow, that's a great observation.
Relate the two.
Yes, yes. It's kind of like speaks to like an American, like those of us living here and our inability to sort of square the difference between what's happening in the world and what's happening in our day to day, right?
Yeah, because it's like, you know, you do have to go about your day to day and all this mundane bullshit keeps happening, but all the while, you know, people are dying, yada yada.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I see kind of what the goal was, but it's it doesn't quite achieve, I think, what they were trying to achieve.
No, and I feel
honestly, I like the first one better.
Yeah, I think I might too. Honestly, it feels more honest or something.
Yeah, that one at least feels like someone speaking from the heart, and this one feels just like someone trying to compile a viral poem.
Yeah, this one feels like someone started writing a poem and then like the news came on in their house and then they just started writing about Israel and Palestine. I don't know, what'd you think of this poem, Marcus?
The title and the image of the Jesus fridge, like, I just hate. So I think the first, like, probably like the first half of it, it's just like kind of meandering. But I don't think it's bad. And in the composition, like you said, like it's, here, obviously I think that I can detect that this is someone who writes. But I mean, we've already said it, the George Floyd moment, like that line, I'm not even going to repeat the whole entire utterance. Like, there's no, like, it sinks the ship. I said the same.
Yes.
I used the same for a different poem on our last episode.
Yeah,
but yeah, you can't recover. You can't recover from that construction, that verbal construct. It's like, I don't want to call it an idea because there's no thought behind it.
It's not an idea.
Like, you can't recover from that.
Yeah, it's like kind of funny because he writes it and then the next line is actually scratch that. It's a George Floyd moment for both American, blah, blah, blah. It's like he knows that that's like that line and that idea is not hitting, but he commits to it even further. And it just, it makes the poem just trail off into like, what is, I think kind of a moronic image of this like swimming pool of blood. Like the bathtub is now a swimming pool. And maybe that relates to the fridge because it's like fucking
appliances,
sort of appliance or something. It is disastrous.
It ends up in its own kind of bloodbath.
Yeah, and this kind of brings and more the first poem, but this kind of brings, and this will connect us to the book that we'll read, but this kind of brings up a topic that Steph and I talk about. My friend Steph, who's also a poet, is like, why do the poems that go viral and the poems that get actually grounding in the public sphere, why are they're not just like bland, but they're usually like bad to the point where they are, it's like they're a rejection of all of the things that I understand to be good about poems. So like, why is it like, why, I guess my question is, why does the public perception of poetry not line up with what a poet's perception of a good poem is? It's not that they don't line up, it's that they're like completely contrasted with one another.
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't exactly know, but
I don't either.
It's
it's mystifying.
Like you said, it's like usually poems in this vein. And I think it's just because people who aren't poets don't know enough to know, like, they don't see the flaws. They just see, the relatable parts of it. Like, I feel like the whole mundanity surrounded by atrocity aspect is very relatable to a lot of people, especially in this day and age.
Yes.
And if you're not like a big reader of poetry, you're like, wow, that's so deep. And, it gets the views rack up, the likes rack up, whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I'm still mystified by the reason as to why. It's not even that it's like, it is like it's like only bad poems go viral. And why is that? I don't understand. What the fuck is wrong with normies?
I have a take, but it comes from I mean, obviously my opinion, but I mean my judgments of things, art writ large, I don't know if you have any sense of this, August, but I don't know, they can range from just being like, I don't know, establishment to reactionary to whatever. So my more reactionary take is that though I mean it isn't completely reactionary, because I'm sure there is some degree of like social theory. I'm trying to think of someone without having to like quote books or articles, but like there is maybe someone like Horkheimer had some kind of aesthetic pessimism about artistic judgment of the masses in modern life, and then that people are like anesthetized to things. But so that's the groundwork for what I'm about to say with the my take or my observation or hypothesis is that poetry in particular, it's there's usually an aim to make something novel or striking, whether that be like in the sheer sound and like prosody of what you're saying, or the imagery, like in a strict sense, like what you're picturing in your mind, and then that both of those often overlapping with like novel ideas that are combined in unexpected ways. And that's not maybe a complete definition of poetry, but those are some aspects that I would outline and stand behind if we're going to contrast it with prose. So for example, with the examples we looked at, like they are contrasting things, but in a very in-your-face way that's not subtle. So someone who doesn't read a lot, it's like, oh yeah, wow, like Genocide, and like someone I know is on Ativan, and like, oh, I hate doing laundry too. And it doesn't come off as like heavy-handed and like just like ham-fisted, because it's not like they read a lot of poetry. And then like, oh, the Jesus fridge or whatever, it's like, oh wow, that's a zany image, like Jesus and my fridge, and like, haha, isn't that like blasphemous or whatever. But to people that read a lot of poetry, or I don't know, even fiction, it's like some of this is like old hat, or it's not really interesting. And then with some of the compositional things, they're easy to overlook because people don't read a lot of poetry, or they're only familiar with like song lyrics and like actual prose. So it's like, oh yeah, this sounds like this doesn't sound like quote normal, so this is poetry.
So it's like, go ahead, go ahead, Eleanor.
I'm gonna go back to said, I think on the first episode about slam poetry, in that I think a lot of these poems are like kind of crafted to elicit those kind of responses, and like, you know, they have the buzzwords, they have a few, you know, flowery phrases or good rhythms or whatever. You know, there's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. It's kind of got a good rhythm to it, and like, you know, it's designed to get points from the judges basically. A lot of these viral poems kind of fit the same mold, like
It's
that
not. It's like
Good
they're.
Bones poem.
Yeah, it's like they're kind of almost a little manipulative in their linguistic tricks or something like that. Like, and if
A
you're
little bit.
exposed, yeah, if you're exposed to this stuff a lot more, those tricks aren't impressive, and in fact come off as, like Marcus said, heavy-handed or just expected or just, you know, old hat, like you said. It's just
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it depends on where you are though, because you know some people get book deals out of that shit. So
yeah,
it really just
well,
depends on who's reading it.
yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm just constantly flabbergasted by like it just seems so obvious to me the flaws of this poem, but I also live and breathe this stuff much more than your average person.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it any either, but fuck do I know? I'm dumb as fuck, so
Joe,
no one needs
come
to listen to
on.
me.
No, we won't let you say that, Eleanor.
I mean,
Uh,
you may think so, but
You've tricked
I
me
live
so
here.
far.
And I wasn't in Hans Geiger, so
I wish I was in Hans Geiger. What would I do in Hans Geiger?
Xylophone.
This is kind of a good transition to the book that we read. The book that we read for this episode, which I'm pretty excited to talk about. So far on this podcast, we've talked about two pop stars, and we've talked about someone whose relationship to pop culture is pretty evident. We've kind of kept really strong in this pop culture vein. But there's another beat that I kind of want this podcast to get into, and that's these poets that kind of come outside of the poetry ecosystem, like the poetry world proper. And when I say poetry ecosystem, I pick that word pretty specifically because I do view it as an ecosystem made up of small presses, large presses, journals, online and print, poets, DIY, MFA programs, right? People more embedded in academic circles, people more embedded in slam circles. But if you take a broad enough look, there is a kind of definable border that you could call the poetry world, right? Like, even if you're someone who dwells in the DIY world or the academic world, you will be cognizant of certain things happening in these other worlds, I think. They all kind of overlap, I guess, is my point. But there's like a whole subset of poetry that kind of flanks the whole system, the whole game. And I guess I'm kind of talking about these like Instagram poets, or these poets that kind of use influencer techniques to spread their poetry. And the ironic thing is, the poets that kind of come out of these camps outsell every other poet, like by large margins. Of course, we're kind of talking about Rupi Kaur here, but there's a lot of poets that kind of have taken this tact. And I don't want it to sound like these people haven't earned their right to publish their poems, or it's like they haven't spent their time in the trenches long enough to become poets. Like, whatever. They're finding their audience and they're finding success in poetry. There's a side of me that says that's fine. But it's very interesting to me that this happens, and the way the poetry world doesn't really subsume these poets. And that kind of brings me to today's poet of discussion, who is Donna Ashworth. Donna Ashworth is a Scottish poet. She worked in music on a cruise ship. She eventually owned a magazine business and then 2 other businesses and then a charity in Azerbaijan. And then she sold them all and she moved to Spain for a year to have her child. Then she moved back to Manchester and she bought another business and was just kind of living this life of a, hustle grind upper middle class mom. And pandemic hits. She sells her business. She puts her very first poem that according to her, it's the first poem basically that she wrote, or at least like the first poem that she made public. She puts it onto the internet and it spreads like wildfire right at the beginning of the pandemic in like April or May. And from that, she has launched a poetry career that has sold tens of thousands of books. I became cognizant of this poet when I was looking at Amazon best-selling poetry lists, which is always an interesting list to look at if you're into this kind of subject. And she's always on it. So Donna Ashworth, I'm kind of amazed by her life story. I don't understand if this is just like a person who can't fail or if this is just what it's like to be like rich. Like feels like she just like is gliding through life with zero difficulty. I know it's not necessarily the case, and I'm sure there's tons of her bio that I don't know because there's not a lot of info out there. But and so her viral poem, it was called let me pull it up here. Well, maybe we can just call it History Will Remember. And I'm going to just insert this video at this stage of all of these Welsh celebrities paying tribute to the National Health Service heroes by reading her poem. This came out in May of 2020.
History will remember when the world stopped and the flights stayed on the ground.
And the cars parked in the street and the trains didn't run.
History will remember when the schools closed.
And the children stayed indoors.
And the medical staff walked towards the fire.
And they didn't run.
History will remember when the people sang.
On their balconies.
In isolation.
But so very much together.
In courage and in song.
History will remember when the people fought.
For their old and their weak.
Protected the vulnerable.
By doing nothing at all.
History will remember when the virus left.
And the house opened.
And the people came out.
And hugged and kissed.
And started again.
Kinder than before.
So it's clearly not what happened. I mean, no. This poem is failed to predict the future. The virus never left. We don't remember all of that bullshit that happened in May of 2020 because everyone has completely blocked that period of time out of their minds. And I mean, I kind of remember this very neoliberal moment when, especially in the UK, I felt like there was all this stuff about people like banging pots and pans at a certain time of day to like commemorate nurses and stuff. Yeah, do you guys remember this?
Yeah.
But vaguely.
I really associate it with like a British thing or like a UK thing, I guess. But like, I just remember it was very much like a positivist, optimistic sort of, we can do this, we can get through this together. This sort of thing that probably lasted about 3 weeks when the pandemic started before everything got weird.
Yeah, I also don't remember everything that went on back then because I kind of blocked it out, but I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, and so that kind of captures who this poet is as far as her bio goes. Her work has been shared by Khloe Kardashian, by Pink, and by a bunch of other names that I assume are like Scottish or Welsh celebrities that I don't recognize. But seem to be important.
Stuart Murdoch from Belle and Sebastian.
Stuart, I wonder. Wow, I should look up if he shared this. But the book that we read is called Wild Hope, And it came out last year, September 2023, through Mango Publishing in the US and Black and White Publishing in the UK. And it sold 20,300 copies as of January this year, which is so many.
Yeah, most poetry books don't do bestseller numbers.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, true. And she sits on that bestseller list for always. She's always on it. She's always selling. And so we read this book, Wild Hope, of initial impressions. Well, what?
I skimmed this book.
Go on. Why? Because it's fucking long.
It's fucking long. And I just, I bounced right off it.
It's 245 pages of poetry. This is a long fucking book of poetry. I mean, I was complaining about the length of fiction earlier. Yeah, Marcus, you said you broke your reading everything streak with this. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm bad at lying, so I think there were a few instances that were like I made 90% of the reading and called it enough. I remember there was a book I had for a class about the Rwandan genocide, and it was a rare book, so it wasn't even something like small printing, and I think mine fell apart, and some pages of it fell out, so when it came time to read it, I couldn't read 15 pages of it. So that stands out in my mind. And I'm sure when I was a middle schooler, I didn't do some reading. But
yeah,
I just didn't have time recently. I've unfortunately been busy with both work and non-work things. And so I did do a skim, printed out a fair amount of it, and read it in small intervals. If I had to quantify how much I read, probably at least half, but definitely not 3/4. This was long. This was uncalled for.
Well, you gave it a better effort than I did.
Well, I read every fucking word and it was a slog, okay?
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, I was actually excited to read this just because I was so curious about it. Eleanor, do you want to pick a poem to read from this that maybe it feels indicative?
Nah.
Okay. I'll pick one.
No.
I'll pick one. I'll pick one if you want to read it.
I don't.
You haven't read one on this episode yet.
No, I haven't.
I'll read one. I'll read this poem called You, which also seems to be posted quite a bit. You. If every single person who has liked you in your lifetime were to light up on a map, it would create the most glitteringly beautiful network you could imagine. Throw in the strangers you've been kind to, the people you've made laugh or inspired along the way, and that star-bright web of you would be an impressive sight to behold. You're so much more than you think you are. You've done so much more than you realize. You're trailing a bright pathway that you don't even know about. What a thing. What a thing indeed. That's the whole book over and over again, basically.
The entire book.
Yeah, Eleanor, about 2 days into me giving you guys the PDF for this book, you were like, this book is pissing me off. I want to know why.
I bounced right off this book. I can't do it. As soon as I started reading, it was like I felt like a vampire being faced with a cross, just utterly repulsed.
What is it about this book that repulsed you? I mean, I know, but
it's not even that the poems are bad. A lot of them are bad in my opinion, but I won't even say bad, but they're just they're not the kind of poems I enjoy, I will say.
No, they're bad.
But it's just, they're so fucking I don't know, saccharine. It's just
saccharine.
It's just drenched in optimism. And I'm a miserable fuck. That is not my vibe. And I just, I don't know. It's hard to read hundreds of pages of poems that are
Yes, the tone doesn't change at all throughout this book. It's kind of in a way, it's like the Drake book, where there's just like there's one chord that this book is playing, and it plays it for 200 pages. I listened to this interview with her on this podcast called White Wine Question Time, and
Jesus Christ, you have to be kidding me.
No. And she the interview called her poems inspirational quotes on steroids, which I thought was actually a pretty good descriptor, but not in a positive way.
It's basically a book full of affirmations, which
yes,
I assume like would do really well on Instagram. Like if she just posted one of these every day, it'd do numbers.
And that's where
trying
she's
to read a whole entire book of them. Ugh.
Yeah, she's extremely successful on Instagram. These a lot of these pages look like they are formatted for Instagram in the sense that they are sometimes centered on the page, which I find to be a indicator of a bad poem. Not always the case, but a centered poem looks like a menu to me. And all apologies to Joshua Jennifer Espinoza, who's a great poet, and she centers her poems, at least in some of her books. But
yes,
this book feels like it's like when you go to like some festival or something and there's like a space that's set up for Instagram photos, you know? There's a lot of pages like that where it's like the centered poem, there's a little drawing, or there's sometimes just a quote. She's just a quote writer. She writes a quote with some little butterflies around it.
Yeah, it's like every page has a ring light.
Marcus, what did you think?
I'm also just like an extremely negative person. There's no like, I guess there's different kinds of negative. I don't want to say that I know Eleanor too much, but I'm sure Eleanor is a subgenre of negative, because I know I'm a different subgenre of negative than our mutual friend, the poet Bobby. So that is to say, I always want to, when I go into anything, good Lord, I'm so self-aware of my pretense right now. So when I go, go to read anything, I'm like, okay, I just have to dampen or mitigate kind of like the most prominent features of like my critical eye. So I read a few of them, like randomly selected, not into sequence, and I thought, okay, this is just like Hallmark greeting card. I can't get like mad at it. It's not good. To reiterate what we've already voiced, like it is absurd that you can go even more than 75 pages with this, but it's well above that. And so some of them and I'm sorry that I don't know which ones I initially read that weren't that bad, that I would just consider like, yeah, affirmations like Eleanor said, or like a greeting card. And they just seemed very surface level, like, I don't know, believe in yourself and share love, etc. Nothing more than that. And of course that gets grating when you just, as you said, it's so a drone note in music, I think, has more like artistic merit and function than as you said, hitting the same chord within this literary context, but so the same chord over and over. Okay, that gets grating. But then I came upon some that use of like the modern vernacular, like dropping vibes when I'm really picturing like a 65-year-old Scottish woman like composing these. It's just like talking about like people's vibes. I'm like, I can't do this. And then there's one that I actually would like to read because like this would melt like the minds of so many people who love discourse. It's a little bit after the like halfway point. It's called Women Know. Women know. Even when we don't know, we just still know, you know? And that is hard to explain to those who don't know. But we do. We just quite simply do. And the most sad thing a woman can do in this life, I think, is start to shut down that knowing, that intuition. Because it is a gift from those fearless females who passed before us, paving the way with their bravery, their fire, their flame. So go on knowing, my friends. Keep the knowing flowing. It is your power.
Yeah, she really likes women.
Yeah, like I said, he just went from like Hallmark card into like girl boss gender essentialism like really fast.
There's several of those kinds of poems.
There's that poem about witches, Just Women. Did you read that one?
Yeah. I could have gone without that one too.
That one felt like a 90s stand-up bit. It was like, oh, they're burning witches, but that was just women being women. Like, that sounds like a slightly misogynistic, funny, like,
that
90s
sounds like a Louis
stand-up
C.K. stand-up joke.
Yeah, like, that's just, they're not being witches, they're just being bitches. Like, that's the punchline. But, yeah.
I will say, like, obviously these poems help a lot of people, or else you wouldn't sell any books. So I guess, like, you know, there's some merit to it, because, like, people, I mean, if like a book about, you know, poems about being hopeful is like, people like that, then that's cool, because, like,
yeah,
it's doing some good at least. Like, my poems don't do any good, they're just me talking shit and being sad.
They
being
bring me
happy.
joy, and I'm not even memeing. Go on.
Yeah, no, I'm with
you.
you on that. I'm just amazed by the type of mind like that would gravitate towards this kind of poetry again. And like, I don't think this book is meant to be read in like a sitting or like, you know, like read sequentially.
No.
Like, I think this book is meant
not.
to like sit on your like bedside table, and you're supposed to pick a poem and you're supposed to read it, and you're supposed to feel like it's talking to you. Because when Donna Ashworth says you in a poem, she's talking to you, the reader. She's never talking about any interesting person in her life. It is always a gift to you. You. And it's sort of, I don't know, it kind of strokes your ego a little bit to be like, yeah, I am creative, and I do have beauty in my heart, and I have touched many souls throughout my life. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad function of poetry, but as they all kind of line up one after the other, it feels manipulative. It feels like I just wanted something that shook out of the monotony of her core subjects of hope and creativity and wellness, and nothing really did that.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, even if like she just like stayed on that subject, just something other than just like completely serious, like, you know, uplifting affirmations, I think would have been nice. Like some variety, like put a joke in there or something.
Yeah,
like,
there's not a lot of humor
I feel like,
in it.
Yeah, it's just like, and there's no sense of who she is as a person other than
right
optimistic. Like, anyone could have written these poems.
Right. It reminds me of the Drake book, where it's just like, man, if you just like, if you just resisted all of your impulses for a moment and went against your own impulses and like did something unexpected and vulnerable, it would open up a chasm in this work that could be filled with something interesting. It's kind of like a self-therapy thing or something.
Yeah, I was going to use that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, I think it kind of is. I remember reading an interview where she said, like, she's not naturally a very optimistic person. She's actually pretty dark. So she like does this because she needs it.
Yes. She says that quite a few times. There was one poem that I did I was like looking for something that was interesting. There was a poem called Tiny Fingers. that one kind of broke the mold for me a little bit. Like that was one poem where I was like, you're writing about something else and you're writing about it with a bit of passion and a bit of personality and a bit of something that you've experienced is in there. And
yeah, there are a few poems that she addresses to her children. And
yeah, that's true.
I feel like that's a good feel for these poems. But, at the same time, it doesn't really feel like, you still don't really get a sense of her as a person. Like, even though she's talking about, something very personal to her, it's like, if someone else took this poem and put their name on it, it's like, sure, this person could have written this poem. Like, there's nothing that says, this is Donna.
You're right. There's lacking in specificity here. I think she's really, I don't want to say scared or terrified, but I do want to. I think she's terrified of specificity in her poems. They're so general. She talks a lot about wanting her poems to be relatable, but
they're meant to appeal to as many people as possible.
Yes, but you do that at the peril of your poem being diluted and your idea and your insight and your images being diluted to the point where if it's for everybody, then it says and it's from nobody,
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think she's worried about that because she's sold thousands of books. So
yeah, that's true. I'm a little worried she's going to listen to this because she's successful, but there's not a lot of stuff about her on the internet, despite her level of success. It's interesting. If you go to the Poetry Foundation website and search her name, there's zero results. So it is weird that the poetry world rejects that.
Yeah, I Googled her and I don't think she has a Wikipedia page or anything.
She doesn't. She doesn't have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah, which is pretty wild.
It is wild.
I was going to say that I think there's a lot of repetition or maybe not a lot, but there's enough mentions of mountains, and mountain is an easy image, easy metaphor to throw in there. And one thing, I guess I don't know, without getting too much into a literary perspective or within my own judgments and preferences, is that the messaging and I guess the situations outlined and the sentiments are black and white, and even when it's supposed to be there's supposed to be a message of overcoming with love or overcoming with some positive emotion, maybe it's because the language used is simple and the images are pretty straightforward, that it's almost just some kind of weird transposition of might is right, but rather than beating things down with your axe, it's no, all of your self-love and hope, and now you just destroyed mental illness, now you just destroyed people who betrayed you destroyed bad memories. There's no gray area, there's no not really subtlety or lightness of hand. So when there is the overcoming, to me, it felt like the equivalent of you watch I don't know, sports, some guy crossing the finish line to adulations and cheers. I think some of the poems are more successful because that flatness and the flatness works better. But in a lot of them, maybe unfortunately and ironically with mental health stuff, that's not how, I don't think that's how it works for anyone. You aren't at the bottom and then you climb the mountain and then you then your love from the mountaintop doesn't help everyone else. There's so many gradations of gray and millions of metaphors in there that just aren't seized upon. So really, maybe it's the sliver of ones that I think make it appealing, because I don't know how a person could find a lot of them inspiring or what have you, because they're just so flattened.
Yeah, I think that's the point, though. I think that's the point of a lot of why these internet poets get famous, is because all their stuff is very easily digestible. It's not complicated. You don't have to think about it. You immediately know what it's about and what it's saying. And I think that's why it gets numbers because it appeals to a lot of people who don't like thinking about poetry.
Oh my God, there's this one moment that really made me angry very early in this poem called Shadows. And it started off with we have all awoken sharply startled in the night, suddenly fearful of the brooding shadow in the corner of our room. Okay, Donna, I'm with you. I'm with you on this image. Hearts beating in our ears, we scramble for the light, only to be greeted by a pile of clothes on a chair. Oh, okay, yeah, I can see. The next stanza, life is like that. No, don't say that. I don't want to just like let the metaphor like function as like the poem. I can't even articulate myself just to say life is like that. Like, I know that's why you're telling us about this. You're making this a metaphor. You're taking this moment that we can relate with and you're going to relate it to other things to reveal what life is like. But you don't have to tell us that life is like that. But then again, we get back to the discussion earlier of what is old hat and what is expected to me and what is a bad trick to me to a person who doesn't read as much poetry. They'd probably go,
it's so true.
Like exactly. They don't have to think about it because it's presented to them. I think this podcast is bad for me. I feel really pretentious all of the time.
I mean, there's an element to this podcast where we are going to feel pretentious, and there's an element to this podcast that is sour grapes because we all wish we were as successful as her. It's okay as long as we're self-aware and everyone listening knows that we're cranking it up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of pretentious, so it's fine.
You're magnanimous, though. I mean, I don't see you as someone. I never thought of you as pretentious.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But I try and find value in poems, even if I don't like them, because I realize that there are a lot of poems that I don't like. But that doesn't mean that there's not any value out of it. But
well, there's two wolves in all of us, right? And
yeah, I mean, I feel like I'll probably get more into that when we start talking about Ruby Kaur and stuff.
She looms in the future of this podcast like nuclear annihilation or something.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, it is We're not pushing that button yet, but it'll happen. Closing thoughts. Wild Hope by Donna Ashworth.
I think this was a hard book to try and get through, just straight through. But I feel like it's only because I was trying to read all of it instead of, like you said, just like reading like a couple a day or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how it's supposed to be digested.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's fine. It's perfectly passable, and it's like doing some good in the world, unlike my miserable ass. So I guess I can't fault it for that. But on a poetry level, it didn't really do it for me.
Well, it shits on Drake, I'd say.
Oh yeah, it absolutely shits on Drake. Everything shits on Drake.
Marcus, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I you primed me because I don't think this is a vanity project like Drake's publication certainly was. What was the description that you quoted? Something on steroids?
Inspirational quotes on steroids?
Yeah, I guess I take exception to that because, and this is an avenue that I don't think there's a lot more to say than what I'm about to say, but maybe the shortcomings felt less Instagram and more just like kitschy, like condolence card. But that being said, it was just the drone, the thematic drone note, I guess, and the length of the book that were the biggest pitfalls, because coming back from Drake, really, where could you go except to a high mountain of love, hope, and everyone around you?
I think it's a great note to end on, and I'm going to segue out of this section with some of her music from the 90s that I found after digging around for a while, so we can enjoy some of that.
Looking out my window, I can see it all. I've seen Mercury rising and the curtain fall. From my window, I can tell the weather. How everything will change at eyes. Everybody passing by.
All right, well, that was the 4th episode, I guess. I don't know. Oh, I do have something to plug. I had a poem come out a week ago through Metatron, Canada's finest indie publisher, Metatron. They're publishing really cool things. Classic press, one of the best. Love them. They're publishing really cool things on their website, which is metatron.press. If you go there and click their digital publications, you can read my 8-part shopping mall poem called Shopping Complex. And
should do it because it's really good.
Oh, thanks, Eleanor. Listen to Eleanor. You just heard how good Eleanor's taste is. So listen to Eleanor. I'll link it in the description, but I would love if you went and read my long poem. Do you guys have anything to close on?
World's supposed to end in a few days.
Yeah, that's right.
So
the eclipse is happening.
In what sense?
Eclipse.
Wait, why is the world?
Some people think it's gonna be I think some people think it's gonna be the rapture or something.
Isn't NASA firing like 3 rockets at the eclipse that are named after like snake gods of yore, or am I just reading the wrong websites?
That sounds kind of awesome.
That's news to me.
I don't know. Look it up. NASA snake rocket. Something will come up. Marcus, anything?
Nothing to plug, but fingers crossed. I'll have a whole lot to plug in the next couple episodes.
Fuck yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me this time, guys. I thought this was great.
Yeah, it was really fun.
We'll pick something a bit more dark for you next time. But until then, this has been Not Fit.
I'll hate it just as much.
This has been Not Fit for Composition. I'm August. This was Eleanor and Marcus, and talk to you soon.
Later, losers.
All right. Wow. Good job, guys. That was good.
Swag.
Swag, bitch.
Swag, bitch.